Left-wing and right-wing extremism actually have the same foundation, and a lot of it goes back to British intelligence. You see, the British Empire created the modern banking system and the modern bond market system, which could be used to finance large-scale wars. And while Britain was building this new system, they were trash-talking it in other countries, such as France, especially with the socialists, and they were bad-mouthing it in Germany and in Austria. So the obvious reason for this trash-talking was certainly to slow down the competition, to prevent these other countries from copying the British system. Now, eventually, France, Germany, Austria, they did try to copy the system, but then it was way too late. And even then, British intelligence could trash talk these new banking systems and these new realities in France, Germany, and Austria. And therefore, the propaganda was right-wing extremism and left-wing extremism. So people would never actually figure out what the actual problem was and how you could fix this problem. The problem of elites fixing the whole system, running the whole system. Now, the socialists had such a terrible understanding of banking and capitalism and trade that socialist countries were never able to really compete. And therefore, for example, Soviet Russia, they had to buy modern technology from Western capitalist countries. So especially the United States, they delivered all the equipment and they even built factories in Russia, creating the oil industry in Russia, the car industry, and many others. And then you had the National Socialists in Germany, or you can call them the fascists, and they were also really, really terrible with money and economy and banking. So the National Socialist economy was not equipped to handle any larger scale war. This became really, really evident once the United States had entered the conflict, and the US could outproduce all other countries who were part of World War II. So one country, United States, produced more equipment than all the other countries combined. Even World War I, Britain could use its vast bond market, and they could sell government bonds throughout the British Empire. And this was something that Germany could not do in World War I. Neither could the Austrians. Britain and the United States were able to dominate the entire political ideological field, so they could use the right wing, the left wing, the political middle, whatever. And this gave them ample opportunities to hide the true power structures and to string people along. Right-wingers today, they believe in a left-wing world conspiracy, and left-wing people believe in a right-wing world conspiracy. Britain understood very early on that it was pretty stupid to continue an empire based on the old Roman model that had been around for so long. So especially the advent of modern science, starting around the year 1700, that changed everything. So instead of having people mainly work as farmers, and you wanted them to wanted the people to go to school and work in the factories and be at universities and create new things for the empire. And to do this transformation, Britain used the Royal Society and its sister organization, which was British Freemasonry. And through basic intelligence methods, modern parliamentarism was created, and the impression that power was now more chaotic and more complicated. The core aspects of the British Empire were still Roman, and this is something that was carried over to the United States of America. So America on paper is a republic, but it's very much a Roman system, but it's a modernized Roman system. So You have parliamentarism. People can sort of participate in politics, but not really. You can only vote for one of the big parties, which form a cartel. Giving more rights to women and children and minorities, and even giving more rights to average men, that was a ploy. That was part of the transformation. So that made it possible to have a powerful economy, and that made, of course, empires such as the British one and the American one, made it way more powerful. So the Enlightenment did not end Roman imperialism, it transformed Roman imperialism. But this was supposed to be kept secret. That's why you saw a bunch of propaganda that implied that Britain and the United States somehow lost their Roman ways. And the Roman nature of these states, the Roman nature was diluted by left-wing ideas or liberal ideas, whatever you want to call them. But it's still very much a Roman system. The right-wingers were told, we need to be more Roman, we need to be more old school, but this was just a ploy because the system was Roman anyway. And the left wing was told that socialism was totally different from a Roman system. Even though real life socialist countries, especially Soviet Russia, they were still Roman systems. You had centralized government, you had total control of the population. The farmers, they had to work day in, day out. They had zero rights, a lot of exploitation. So the Soviet Union was essentially a Roman system. So that's the scam that is being played against the left wing. It's ultimately a phony choice. Whether you're a right-wing activist or a left-wing activist, or you like the political center and the tradition of enlightenment and whatnot, whichever one you pick, you end up with a Roman-style control system. The British politician Thomas Duncombe in 1828 complained about Nathan Rothschild, and this Thomas Duncombe guy, he was a populist, but he was really working for the British royalty and the power structures, and he pretended to be a socialist, or maybe even he sort of believed himself to be a socialist, but this was all under control. And so as early as 1828, Thomas Duncombe pushed this classic conspiracy narrative from a left-wing perspective. Okay, so he claimed that Nathan Rothschild had endless amounts of money. Rothschild was deciding about war or peace, and that he had this vast intelligence network, and he wanted to take over Europe and take over the world. So this was at a time when the Rothschild family and many other banking families were employed by the British colonial empire. So the empire itself created modern fractional banking. And this was a risky adventure, because you had to control the entire system by British intelligence. So you needed the central bank, the new Bank of England, and this had to work in concert with the big phony private merchant banks, such as Lloyd's and Barings and Barclays and Rothschild. So this whole thing had to be under control in order to prevent the system from collapsing. Because if you have a fractional system, you can scale it up, but it could also implode if things don't work out. And so other countries, they saw this as a very, very dangerous experiment, and they did not want to copy it. So Portugal or Spain, France, they tried to do it the old-fashioned way. But Britain was building this new system. And while building the system, British intelligence was bad-mouthing this new system, and was bad mouthing it using right wing extremism and the new left wing extremism. So this was supposed to make other countries wary of this idea, and it was also designed to just make people angry in France and Germany and Austria. Nobody was really supposed to understand how the British system was created. It was completely controlled by intelligence. The speeches given by Thomas Duncombe, the British politician, and these speeches were written by others. For example, Baron Henry Fitzgerald de Rose, whose father was a member of the Privy Council. He wrote the stuff that Thomas Duncombe said in public. And the grandfather of the Baron was a member of the Royal Society, and the Royal Society was essentially the leading scientific organization, but it was also used for espionage and propaganda. So, for example, one of the leaders of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, John Robison, wrote this early bestseller conspiracy book called Proofs of a Conspiracy. And that book was simply designed to make people in France angry, to foster chaos in France. You know, it basically said that the French Revolution was run by Satanists and anarchists and whatnot, even though the original idea behind the French Revolution was just to copy Britain and have a half monarchy, a constitutional monarchy, and maybe even copy the American system, you know, have a republic or whatever. But when the revolution happened in France and it all turned into chaos, everybody who was anybody in France reverted back to Roman style, to a Roman style of government and a Roman type system, because there was no alternative to it, and they needed to have control. So the first best-selling conspiracy book, Proofs of a Conspiracy, this was handled by British intelligence, and they made sure that there was no real mentioning whatsoever of British intelligence being involved somehow in the French Revolution to get rid of the king and foster chaos. So Duncombe had a friend in France, Alfred d'Orsay, and he came from this family, Tourne and Taxis, who were also tied into British intelligence, and they also were tied into conspiracy literature. And Thomas Duncombe is responsible for the book Jews of England, Their History and Wrongs, which came out in 1866. And this book essentially gives you the foundation for left-wing extremism and right-wing extremism. According to this book, any sort of trade, individualism, private property, and so on, all of these things are of the devil. And these things, they only lead to misery and exploitation by default, and everybody's just exploiting everybody. Because this is a foundational thought in communist thinking. And so he tells us history of the aristocracy getting into debt with the Jews and the church and the regular population. So this all turned into a big nightmare. That's how he explains it. He never tells you that it was fairly easy back then for the ruling aristocracy to recruit Jewish people and to use them for certain transactions and use them for banking while totally controlling them. Duncombe wants to sound scientific, so he's not a fan of these old medieval myths about Jews, but he tries to create new myths, and he tries to make them sound scientific. His answer to everything is, of course, socialism. We should not really trade, we should not really have banking, we should not make money through money and all that nonsense. Now, of course, he was tied into British into British aristocracy and the British Empire, and he himself enjoyed the fruits of capitalism. So he was big into gambling, and he had huge debts, and he was protected by the aristocracy. So he wouldn't have to go to prison for his debts. So he was a phony. He was a liar. He was a fake. He was pushing socialism, and he was pushing these ideas in order to protect the new British system, the new British fractional banking system, and the bond market, and all of it. As I've mentioned, he had this powerful friend in France, and you can pretty much imagine how this propaganda pipeline came to be. So British intelligence could spread this idea in France, and this then became the early French socialist movement. And there's a variety of authors, and it's very anti-Semitic, and they basically paint greed and exploitation as Jewish features. Now, non-Jews can have these features or show this behavior according to these early French socialist authors. But obviously, Jewish people did not invent greed and exploitation. We have almost 10,000 years of imperialist history. And so the problem was Roman-type systems, baseline imperialism, which is, of course, total control and total greed and total exploitation. At some point, the left movement abandoned this anti-Semitic aspect. They removed it, but all of the rest of what they thought the enemy and the problem was, all of the rest remained intact. So anything individualism, anything trade and banking and individual prosperity, all these things are the devil. I mean, literally, the devil must create misery, must end in war, must always be bad. So all of this has to be fought against at every level in society. So therefore, socialism. That's what they argue. And obviously, socialist countries, they were horrible when it came to banking. They were horrible when it came to trade and production. Now, most of these thoughts were carried over into the right-wing movement in the 1800s, especially in Germany and Austria. Now, it's obvious what the British intended with this propaganda. They wanted to slow down Germans, they wanted to slow down Austrians. They wanted to pitch people in those countries against modern banking. The right wing adopted pretty much the same ideas that Duncombe was writing about, and the right-wingers, they almost copied verbatim material from early French socialists. It was just adapted. And then what the right wing did was exaggerate the anti-Semitic component. Just almost put this in the center. But all the right wing did was call for just another baseline old school Roman system. So instead of modernizing, instead of having a modernized Roman system such as Britain and the United States, these right-wingers were demanding a medieval style Roman system, or even just copying from Rome directly. And this is what you saw with the National Socialists. So they were very, very big fans of Rome. If you look at all the iconography and the big marches and the symbolism, this was all just Rome. And the National Socialists did not have a single idea, a single new idea, so no new idea of their own. It was just have a Roman system, but with a strong ethnic component to it. Don't have modern banking, don't have modern economy, don't have modern, individualism and prosperity. Just an old school Roman system, and put the ethnic question in the center of it. Now, the actual old Roman Empire, it did not care for what you looked like or what your religion was, as long as you submitted to Roman authority and control. And that made it possible for Rome to conquer new territories and absorb these people, give them partial autonomy, and but still running them as provinces. Now, the National Socialists, they failed miserably in just integrating new conquered peoples, because the National Socialists were treating other people so horribly. And even the generals were, they understood that this was a huge problem, because the generals were trained in the old Roman style of thought, but treating people so horribly in Eastern Europe especially, that made it impossible to have these conquered people be loyal to Germany and to use these people against Soviet Russia. So fascism doesn't work, socialism doesn't work, and modern republics or constitutional monarchies are a scam, because those are still Roman systems, but they're modernized Roman systems. Trade isn't bad per se, and individual property isn't bad per se. We have to understand imperialism in much greater detail, and we have to understand the intelligence level at a much greater detail.